All right, good evening, and thank you for participating in tonight's virtual town hall hosted by Seattle's 36th District legislators, Senator Noel Frame and Representatives Liz Berry and Julia Reed. Some of you have submitted questions in advance tonight, and we'll relay those questions to the lawmakers. And you may also submit your questions live in the comment section of the platform that you are watching on. So submit your questions now, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the hour that we have tonight. But before we get started with questions, our lawmakers would like to give some brief opening remarks and also tell us what piece of legislation that they worked on this session they're most excited about. So I am going to hand it over to Senator Frame to get us started.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone that's with us this evening. We're so excited to have you. I'm Noel Frame, your state senator, representing the 36th district for now more than 8 years, but only in the Senate for the last year plus. As you may know, I am the vice chair of the Senate Housing Committee, also vice chair of the Senate Business, Financial Services, Gaming, and Trade Committee, that's a long one, and then a member of the Human Services Committee. And the bill that I'm most excited about, although under sad circumstances, but this was an important thing for me to learn from our constituent about the importance of promoting to families the understanding about congenital cytomegalovirus, which is the #1 viral cause of birth defects. And it's kind of the thing that nobody knows. As somebody who had a baby recently and read all the guidelines, don't scoop the litter box, don't eat cold cuts, don't eat sushi. Nobody told me, maybe don't share a spoon with my little kid that has saliva, that has CMV in it potentially. And sadly, learned about this from a constituent who lost a baby to the impacts of CMV, and really, really proud to pass a bill that is going to get education out to families moving forward, so more families know how to avoid transmission of CMV and hopefully have healthier babies and families moving forward. So that's mine. Representative Berry, you want to go? Yeah, go.
I'd love to. So great to see you all tonight. I have been proudly representing all of you in the state legislature since 2020. So this was my 4th session. I serve as chair of the House Labor Committee. It's my 2nd year serving as a chair. And I also serve on the Energy Environment Committee and the Transportation Committees. And I am very proud to be the only Seattle member on the House Transportation Committee. And I take that job very seriously to bring your urbanist voice to the legislature. I passed 5 bills this year, and I think I'm a little bit tied between 2. And I think I'm going to talk about one in a little bit. So I'm going to tell you about the other bill, which is a ban on stealthing in the state of Washington, which is the non-consensual removal of a sexually protected device. This is a real labor of love for me because a friend of mine came forward to me over the summer and told me about her story of being stealthed. And the more I learned about it, the more I understood that this is a form of rape. It's a form of sexual assault. And I am so proud that Washington became the 3rd state in the country to ban this type of sexual assault and allow victims to seek justice in the courts through a cause of action where they can receive damages and make sure that their perpetrators are held to account. So it's something that I don't really dabble in very often is this type of law, but I learned a lot. And I'm really happy that we'll be able to protect so many people in the state of Washington with this new law. So with that, I will pass it off to Representative Reed.
Hi, everyone. I'm Representative Reed, your other House representative in the 36th district. I just wrapped up my 2nd session of my 1st term, so it's been very exciting, and I feel very lucky to serve with Senator Frame and Rep. Berry, who have been really great mentors and guides for me through this process. A lot of love in the 36th delegation. So in the legislature, I vice chair the Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Committee. And I also serve on the Housing Committee. I do a lot of work in the housing space, including advocating for more housing supply, housing stabilization, other needs in the legislature. And then I also serve on the Capital Budget Committee, which is a really fun committee. It's a great opportunity, especially to work with the other members in the delegation to try to meet some of the capital funding needs in the state of Washington, and also to support in particular our arts community and creative economy across the state, where there are so many capital needs. And also the Capital Budget Committee does a lot with school construction and things like HVAC improvements in schools. So we did a lot of funding in that space this session. And I'm also the chair of the House and Senate Democratic Maritime Maritime Caucus. So one of the things that I particularly focus on in the delegation is advocating for our maritime businesses, our marine industries, of which we have a lot here in the 36. One piece of legislation that I'm really actually super proud of that I worked on with Senator Frame this session was the Crane Safety Bill, House Bill 2022. This was a bill that came to us, that was brought to us by the parents of a young woman who was killed in 2019, just on the edge of our district in the South Lake Union crane collapse. You might remember that crane collapse at the Google building. 4 people were killed, retired public servant, 2 of the iron workers who were working on the crane, and then this young woman who was just 19 years old. She was a student at Seattle Pacific University. Her parents have really made it their cause to advocate for crane safety legislation all across the country. And they have been working with us to close some of the final legal loopholes around crane safety here in Washington state. So that bill did pass, and it basically focuses on requiring cities and towns to have safety corridors when a crane is being disassembled or assembled. That's the most dangerous point for the crane. And if there had been a safety corridor, if Mercer had been blocked off for a little bit while the crane was being disassembled, Pantip Wong would still be with us today, as with those other 4 folks. It also requires operators to get a permit if they're going to assemble or disassemble a crane. So that helps ensure that they are meeting all of the legal requirements, and it requires that a manual be available. Sounds kind of crazy, but a lot of the cranes that construction workers are working on, they don't necessarily get a manual for how to disassemble or assemble the crane, or they might have a manual on site, but it might be in Chinese or Russian or Spanish or in a language they don't speak. So it requires that a manual be available in English on the site so people understand these are the specific steps you need to take to assemble and disassemble this model. So it was a huge honor to work on that bill with Andrea and Henry. They came to every vote, every committee hearing. I very much hope we'll be able to have them at the bill signing. We're waiting to hear when that's going to be scheduled. But it was really great. We live in a neighborhood and a district where we have a lot of construction, a lot of cranes. I live very close to the Queen Anne Safeway project, and I want to know that the work being done on those cranes is safe for our community and for the people that are working there. So that was a bill I was really excited to work on this session.
All right, thank you so much. And Rep. Reed, we're just going to go right back to you with the next question.
All right, I'll try to be more brief this time.
All right. What did the legislature do to make higher education more attainable this session?
Yeah, we took some big swings at higher education this session. I introduced a bill, unfortunately didn't pass, but I'm hoping to bring it back next year to create a opt-out guaranteed admissions program in the state. So that would say that every qualified young person in our state is guaranteed a spot at a state university. They do this in a lot of other states. It's a very effective way to ensure that young people are enrolling in higher education and know that there is a place for them if they get the grades in high school. We also put some bills forward to make community college free in Washington state. I really think that this is the direction our state should go. Other states have done it. Tennessee has done this. We've done it in parts of the state. So we have what are called promise programs in Seattle and parts of King County and a few other places. I really think we're ready to make the 13th and 14th year of education a state entitlement for all students. We weren't really ready to make it this year. It is going to be kind of expensive. So it will be something we will have to work on. But we did get some progress on both of those bills. They did not pass, but one project that we did pass for higher ed this year was the bill that ensures that if you receive SNAP benefits, so if you're getting nutritional benefits from the state, that you are automatically enrolled in the Washington College Grants. You don't have to fill out a FAFSA. if you're already receiving benefits from the state, to get the state's grant aid for higher education. And that's because to get on nutritional benefits, which is not easy, the state already has all of your financial information that we need to verify that you qualify for the college grant. And it's unnecessary to have this additional barrier. So we already took that barrier away for other forms of assistance. And this year, we also took that away for households that are receiving SNAP. So we hope that will really help, especially because there's a lot of chaos going on right now with the FAFSA forms, and we're trying to help navigate our schools and students through that.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. We've got a couple more questions that we'll go through that came in ahead of time, and then we'll shift to taking some of the questions that are coming in real time. But this next one is for Rep. Berry. So thank you for all voting to pass gun safety bills this session. And will there be any more next year?
Oh, yes, you better believe it. Many of you know my passion, and one of the reasons I ran for office was to end gun violence in our communities. And I am still so devastated every day opening the Seattle Times and reading about another senseless shooting, another homicide, another suicide, another murder by guns. And this year we made modest progress on the gun safety front. We passed one of my bills to mandate 24-hour reporting if your firearm is lost or stolen, which is key for law enforcement getting in front of that gun being used and trafficked, another crime. We passed a bill allowing Washington State Patrol to seize, to destroy firearms that they seize. We banned open carry at libraries and zoos. And we also put some more safety regulations around firearm dealers. All of these bills will make incremental steps to making our community safer from gun violence, but we have still more work to do. I will be bringing back my bill next year to mandate a permit to purchase a firearm and mandatory live fire safety training for all firearm purchase in the state of Washington. It is very simple. States that have had permit laws on the books for 20 or 30 years have seen a decrease in gun violence in those states. States that have outright repealed their permitting laws have seen gun violence escalate. The numbers speak for themselves, and it's very important that Washington enact this law because permitting helps very much with straw purchasing. So folks who go in to purchase a firearm for somebody else are more deterred from doing that if they know that they have to get a permit to purchase that firearm for the person they've requested to do that for. I also think we need to look at more of our safe storage laws around Washington. The number one source of stolen guns in America is from parked cars. I want to take a look at that a little bit more about how we can make sure that folks are locking up their guns securely when they're not bringing them on their person to events and leaving it in their cars, because people know they're there and they're stealing them and using them in crimes. So there's a lot more work to do, but I'm really proud that we continue to lead the country as one of the top 10 states for gun safety measures. But I'm not going to quit until we have the gold standard here in Washington. So thank you for your question.
Thank you so much. All right, this next question is for Senator Frame. And it is, does revenue from the capital gains tax go towards funding schools? And if not, are you planning on creating or supporting a bill that would use those extra funds for K-12 schools?
Yeah, so great question. The capital gains tax, which we passed in the 2021 session, it's been a minute, when I was chair of the House Finance Committee, does indeed go in part to our public schools. The way that the bill was structured is that the first $500 million goes to the Education Legacy Trust account, which can be used for K-12 schools, but also early learning, childcare, and higher education. So it's a flexible account. And then anything in excess of $500 million goes into the K-12 school construction account. As you all know, the capital gains tax has exceeded our expectations in terms of revenue collection. I mean, quite frankly, nearly $1 billion, well ahead of what we thought. And the money going to that school construction account is really helping schools across the state update their old buildings. It's been interesting in all the fight of defining what basic education is and fully funding schools. School construction was just sort of left out of that. And of course, our children can't learn if the building is falling apart around them. Sorry for all the notifications while I'm talking, team. So it absolutely is there. And in terms of the follow-up question, like, do I plan to do more? I absolutely plan to do more. We still have the most upside down and regressive tax code. Only the second worst tax code in the nation now. We moved up one position. Florida has taken the worst spot, big surprise. And we continue to need to do work to make the tax code more progressive and make sure that we have sufficient revenue for our K-12 schools and other community priorities. So I will continue to do that work. Thanks for the question.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. We are going to go with this question, which is open for anybody. It was specifically directed to Rep. Berry, but if anybody else has any input on it, please feel free. Can you report on the transportation budget to support for Amtrak support in any various ways, specifically around the Nisqually River, maybe before looking at changes to reduce I-5 options?
Yes, I see that question's from John Burnell. Hi, John. Thanks for your question. I know what a passionate advocate you are for our rail, and I am too, so much so. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I know that our transportation package did include more funding for our Amtrak service. We know that we need to continue to upgrade this important rail option for folks to make it even more functioning for all of us and to be able to use it, especially as our population continues to grow in Washington. We simply cannot get people around only through the I-5 corridor in cars and by our airports that are starting to really bust at the seams. We don't have room to expand SeaTac any further. We need to look for further options there as well. And we know that the greenest option is rail. And I am also a passionate advocate for our rail systems. And I'm also really excited to report that you may all know about the $50 million that we were able to secure a couple of years ago for the to redo the Aurora corridor for safety improvements. We were able to secure, your delegation was able to secure $4 million to be immediately allocated to the city of Seattle to get started on the project as soon as possible. So that was, I think, also a really exciting development for our community in the transportation budget. So thanks for asking about those questions.
Great. Thank you so much. And we have another one for Rep. Berry, and this is from Patrick. Is there any interest in changing Washington from at-will to for-cause employment? Montana is the only state in the union that is not at-will by default. Fun fact.
Classic.
I love it. Pat McGaw. It's all of our friends are on here. I think it's just we're just having fun with our friends tonight. Julia might definitely want to add to this question, I'm sure, but Pat, definitely there's interest to do that. That would obviously be a lot more favorable for workers, which I'm always looking for ways to make, level out the playing field between business and workers. I think it would probably be a really hard thing to do. I'm not afraid of doing hard things. Julia and Noelle are not afraid of doing hard things. So I would say that I'm very supportive. It's not something that's been on my radar as like a top priority, but definitely interested in looking at it. And I know Julia is laser focused on passing our personnel records bill next year. And I think I'll pass over to Julia to let everyone else know about that bill and our plans for 2025.
Yeah, the personnel records bill, and Pat featured prominently in my floor speech on that last year when we were trying to get this bill passed, is really about ensuring that you as a worker should have the right to access your own personnel file and to understand, like, if you are being put on, let's say, a performance improvement plan, that you know why, or that you're able to see the records that your employer is keeping on you. And you might need those records to apply for benefits or for immigration purposes. And if you are a public employee, if you work for the state of Washington, you have a pathway that's legally protected to access them through the Public Records Act. But if you work for a private corporation and they decide not to share with you or try to put roadblocks in, there's not a lot under law right now to protect you. So we're trying to definitely increase those protections. And I would say we tried, we were really hopeful this year, didn't make it, but I think next year is another opportunity. It's just a really common sense bill and people get it. And I think we can try to push it through next year. And then, I think with the at-will and for-cause employment, to Liz's point, I think there's a lot of interest. I think I want to hear more from our labor partners about kind of how they would respond to how they respond to that, and like how it interacts with their work that's underway in terms of like trying to help get more unions and more workplaces, and how we can kind of work those together. So that's kind of what I'm looking for and hoping to hear more about in that front.
Great, thank you so much. And this next question is for Senator Frame. And it is, if I have an idea for a law, what is the best way to see that idea turn into a bill?
Great, really great question. And this happens all the time. And I mean, Julie and I both mentioned bills that we passed this year that were based in the experiences of our constituents. I passed multiple bills over the last 8 years that came from constituents. So first and foremost, reaching out to us now is the right time, the interim. Like, we just got out of the short session. We're thinking ahead to the 2025 longer session, setting up conversations with us. It could be a quick, 15 to 30 minute Zoom. I've got this idea. You know anything about it? Just to start the conversation. And then just so you kind of know what we do on the back end, like, we'll talk to our partisan and nonpartisan staff. Hey, can you see if anything's been done on this? Like, what it would look like to change it? What like context would be good for us to know? Then they'll give us a little bit of feedback. Maybe we have another meeting with you. And from there, we might have some guidance and suggestions for you. Hey, this issue, this question that you have, this advocacy group worked on that issue a few years ago. You should go talk to them, see if they're interested in putting that on their agenda, like, and giving you the advice of like how to build support. Some bills are relatively simple fixes. Some are much more complex. And I think the CMV bill is a really great example where there was some advocacy support behind that, but really nascent, grassroots, all volunteers, parents, and surprisingly to me, audiologists, which profound hearing loss is one of the major birth defects that families have seen with their babies that contract CMV in utero. And so we were in this process with very, very grassroots advocates where we said, we're going to need to talk to the Department of Health. Department of Health gave us a few different options. We kind of decided together with the advocates what that would look like. So it was really a two-way conversation. I will say sometimes like we get ideas and it's way outside of our depth of experience. We're not on the right committees of jurisdictions. We might say, hey, let me talk to a colleague of mine, see if they want to take a lead on that. And we can still be the liaison as your delegation, but we might actually put you in touch with another legislator who's super passionate about that, has a background in that issue, et cetera. So we can approach it in a number of ways, but the key message is like, start that conversation literally right now. Like, the thing that always breaks my heart is when people show up at like our town hall in November or December, and it's like, you think that that's a lot of time before the session, but it is not. So start those conversations now, and hopefully we can help you get something proposed and maybe even across the finish line if it all works out. Thanks for the question.
All right, thank you. And this next question is for Representative Reed. And this person would like to say that they were disappointed to see that Seattle's proposed comprehensive plan, which risks us halving the rate of housing development compared to the previous decade. As our representatives, what action are you going to take on the upcoming session to have a more robust attitude towards upzoning? And
yeah,
policies?
I was super disappointed too. And I'll tell you that myself, the other 36 members, other folks in the Seattle delegation, we've made our disappointment known directly to the city and to the mayor's folks who are leading the comprehensive plan. And I would also note for folks that are listening that there will be a bunch of listening sessions underway, and I think some of them have already started, where the city will be looking to hear from residents about the comprehensive plan. So one of the best things you can do if you are disappointed is don't tweet about it, don't email us in the legislature, but I mean, do email us, but go to the sessions, go to the listening sessions, express your frustration directly, fill out surveys from the city so that they have that data from you. So we have reached out directly to the city to kind of express our frustration and to seek a meeting. And we're hoping to meet with folks in a little bit later on in April to talk about the plan. It's challenging in a lot of ways. I mean, it's hard because we need more housing in the city and we want to see the biggest city in the state leading on housing issues. We should be in the forefront. And when you've got cities like Bellevue or Kirkland outpacing us, we're just not doing enough. And then it's also difficult because in the legislature, when we're trying to advocate for the city of Seattle, we want to be able to say the city is really doing as much as it possibly can. And that's why they need the state to help fill in the gap. And when the city isn't seen to be doing as much as they can with the tools, the legislature has worked really, really hard, and we have individually worked really, really hard to provide. It makes it that much harder for us to advocate for resources and programs and changes that our residents in the city of Seattle need. You guys might know, or maybe you don't, that like the legislature is kind of famously anti-Seattle. It turns out being like the economic engine of the state doesn't get you. You think that would get you some credit in legislative policy, but it doesn't always. In fact, it can be challenging. So we're often playing defense as it is, trying to keep people from writing little sneaky riders into bills to say, this applies to every city except cities over a certain number of millions in King County, or this applies. So we're already trying to play defense to try to protect and make sure Seattle is getting its fair share from the state. And when the city is not showing that it's using the best tools the state has, that's super frustrating. So things we can do. I hope you'll make your voices known. If you're frustrated with the comp plan, we are making our voices known. There is another representative for, I know Jess Bateman has been looking into, there's some question about whether or not the city's comp plan even meets the requirements of current state law under the missing middle housing bill we passed. So we're asking agencies to look into that. We are also trying to address, it's not just City of Seattle government, but lots of local governments for a whole range of reasons aren't necessarily implementing the tools the legislature is making available. So we're looking at ways that we can better support accountability and also just support those governments. So you'll see a lot of things in housing bills, like directing the Department of Commerce to write a model ordinance for how that a local government can just put on its books. So in the city of Seattle, we have full-time paid city council members. In most of the cities in the state, that's not the case. They have volunteer council members who have other jobs and other things going on. They have very small staff. And so if we're going to be implementing these complex policies, we need to show them like, hey, here's something you can literally just take and put into your municipal code. And if you do that, you will be in compliance with the new law. There was also a bill this session that I would expect to come back next session, looking at how to hold cities accountable for housing laws specifically and making sure that those are being implemented. And another bill I was hopeful would pass this session, I'm looking forward to seeing next session, is the bill to create the Department of Housing. So right now, all of this housing policy and enforcement sits under the Department of Commerce, which we kind of jokingly call the Department of Stuff sometimes, because they do like a billion things. And it's a massive department, like God bless Director Fong, who's currently leading it. It's a lot to wrangle, and housing issues don't always get the sole focus and attention they need because commerce is doing so many things. So there has been some discussion at the state about whether we need a specific department that reports to the governor that just focuses on housing, that is responsible for kind of the implementation of housing policy and accountability and partnering with cities and all that other work. So maybe we'll see that in the future, but I would expect we are going to continue to be pushing on the comprehensive plan question, and we hope that our city will update the plan before it is finalized. And I hope that if you don't find that the plan is sufficient, as I do not, I hope that you'll make your voice heard to your local elected officials.
Great, thank you. All right, this next question is for Representative Berry. So what education-related legislation did the legislature pass this year, and how will it affect our Seattle public schools?
Well, many of you may know that I am a proud Seattle Public Schools parent. My son George is a second grader at John Hay, and my daughter Eleanor will be there soon, hopefully. And so making sure that our schools, our public schools are well funded is a passion of mine and Julia's and Noelle's, and making sure that all kids in the state of Washington have access to a world-class public education system is the paramount duty of the state. And I would say that this year we made big strides in our budget to keep ensuring that we are getting the proper funding to our public schools. We have more work to do. But for example, we included an extra $26 million for special education, raising the cap once again. The three of us want to see that cap absolutely eliminated, that every single school that has a needs for special ed kids will get the full funding from the state that they need to teach that student and let that student thrive. We're working on it. We also were able to expand the free school breakfast and lunches for all students, where our goal is to make sure that all students have access to it. We're able to put additional funding to add more meals for more students. So again, more steps to getting to full funding. We put $72 million into prototypical school staffing, which are staff members in our public schools who help our students so much. They were incredibly underpaid, and we're making sure that they're earning a living wage, and then we're also expanding that service for more students. We made sure that in the state of Washington, our students won't see book bans. We've seen those all across the country. That is not going to happen here in Washington State. And we also passed a bill to make sure that all curriculum is inclusive of all students, including our LGBTQ students as well. So some really important policy priorities, but I would also say some really key budget investments in our K through 12 education system. And Noelle also touched on investments in our capital budget for school construction that's also funded through capital gain. So for example, Whittier Elementary is giving $7 million to get a new roof. So things like that help keep our buildings safe and up to date and ready for our students to learn. So we know that K through 12 public education is a huge priority of the 36th district, and all of us are laser focused on making sure that we're getting not only good policies in place, but really robust funding as well. And we're going to keep fighting until public schools have every dollar they need to be successful. So thank you for your question.
Great, thank you. All right, this next question is for Senator Frame. And this person would like you to know that they're disappointed that the Keep Our Care Act didn't pass this session, and would like to know what happened and how we can ensure it passes next session.
Yeah, thanks for that question. The Keep Our Care Act, for folks that weren't tracking that, this is really looking at trying to protect against any further hospital mergers that are really limiting access to care. Great example of this. When I was pregnant with Holden and I was choosing where I was going to have my baby, I chose Virginia Mason because it was a non-Catholic hospital. And literally while I was pregnant, CHI Franciscan bought out Virginia Mason, and my options were precluded had anything happened to me that the Catholic Church didn't agree with from a medical care standpoint. This is happening all over our state. People are really getting, having their access to care. And it's not just reproductive health care, it's end of life care. It's a lot of things. And the three of us were all very strong supporters of this legislation. And we fought really hard for it in the Senate. It was the longest floor debate of the year. And I think this is one of those examples where we take big swings, even in short sessions, but sometimes we simply don't have enough time to do all the work of socializing issues on sort of both sides of the rotunda, as we said. I feel like we at Advocates invested a lot of energy on the Senate side, thinking that would be the big barrier. And frankly, I think we probably collectively didn't spend enough time in the House, and by the time it got there with a truncated schedule, it just wasn't ready for prime time, is the best way I would describe it. That happens a lot in short sessions, particularly with bills this high profile and this controversial, but we are all strong supporters of that and really hope that it will come back next year and that we can pass it, because we are really limiting access for patients in this state. And, you know, it's crazy. You think about us being this very pro-choice state, for example, and when you get, like, when the rubber meets the road, like, we're not as pro-choice as you would think we are in practice because of things like hospital mergers and a vast majority of our healthcare systems in Washington state being Catholic organizations. So It's real. Thank you for the question. We'll keep fighting.
Great. Thank you so much. This next question is for Representative Reed. You all supported rent control. As a small landlord, I'm worried about how this will lower housing quality and supply. Can you talk about why you supported it?
Okay, we're going to get a little nerdy for a second. So, rent control is a policy that says that unit's rent is fixed. And even if that unit gets new tenants, you cannot increase the rent more than a certain amount. Rent stabilization, which is the bill that we actually voted on in the legislature and is the policy we think is, and I'm going to say we because we all voted for it, the policy that we think is best for Washington State, says that you have some modest limits on how much you can increase rent year to year for an existing tenant. But if that tenant leaves or if their lease changes, you are able to reset the rent at the level that you think or that the market will bear. So it's a little bit different. I definitely hear that anxiety on supply. I think that's why, honestly, we've been doing a lot of work in the legislature to increase housing supply. So we've actually done the most bills we've done on housing in the 2 years that I've been there have been focused on what we think of as the supply side of the equation. How do we make it easier to build more homes and more different types of homes faster? So we did the missing middle housing bill. Last session, we passed the single room occupancy bill, which allows for co-living to be a legal form of housing statewide. We've done a lot of work on accessory dwelling units and DADUs, detached accessory dwelling units. So we've done a lot of work on housing supply. We've been working on bills like lot splitting, et cetera. We haven't done a lot of work on as much work successfully on the other two legs of this kind of three-legged housing stool. So there's supply. That's how do we build more homes for the people that need them. There's stabilization, which is how do we keep more people in the homes that they already have. And then there's subsidy, which is how do we make it affordable for people who are who just don't have the economic means to enter into an unsubsidized market to participate in homes. So that's things like housing vouchers and utility vouchers. So the stabilization is the one area where, frankly, we just have not made very good progress. And over 50% of the people in the state and over 50% of the people in our district are renters. And they are in a housing market where the price of housing that they pay is largely unregulated. There's other regulations in the rental housing market, but in terms of the price that they have to pay month to month or year to year, that can be increased 45%, 50%, 120%. And even in legislature, we have folks in legislature talking about, my rent went up 35% or 45%. So what we were proposing with the rent stabilization bill is to say that for existing tenants, the most you can increase rent each year it was originally 5%. I think we finally went up to 7% in the final bill. There was also a Senate version where it was at 15%, I think. So there were a few different versions, and we were hoping we would have a chance to work with the rental housing lobby, the paid lobbyists who represent people that rent homes to other people, that they would come to the table and negotiate in good faith. That was not the case. They just focused on really trying to kill the bill, which is unfortunate because I don't think that is good policy. So in lieu of that, we proposed a few different dials. And I rent a condo. I'm a very small landlord. I own a condo. I live with my boyfriend in his condo, so we rent my condo. So, I understand some of the challenges, but I also understand some of the realities of being a landlord. My biggest expense is my mortgage. That's fixed every month for 30 years. I know what that's going to be. There is variation in things like utilities and property taxes, but that's a pretty small percentage of my overall expenses as a landlord compared to mortgage. And so what we found from working with landlords, from looking at data, is that a 5% cap, and maybe the final cap will end up being a little higher, was very reasonable and still allowed you to make a good rate of return and gave some stability to renters. I want renters to have the same stability that I have as a property owner, to say, I know that my rent is only going to go up so much, is either going to not go up at all, that would be my ideal, or that it's only going to go up a very modest and manageable amount. And I know that if I'm renting a home, I can stay here, I can live here. You know, I was a renter. I know how anxiety inducing it is to say, I've put a lot into the maintenance and upkeep of my property. Just because I rent it doesn't mean I don't care about it. And now I don't know how long I'm going to be able to stay here next year or the year after. Will I have to move my kids to a different school district? Will I have to, will I be able to get to work? Okay. Those are real anxieties that tons of people in our state are facing and that people across the country are facing. And I think it's reasonable to say that they deserve some stability. And that doesn't mean that, no one can be a landlord or no one can rent properties, but we're trying to bring a little bit more regulation to a price that is largely unregulated, just like we regulate the prices of other essential items like healthcare, utilities, food in some cases. Housing is just as important as that. And it's an area that we haven't really invested a lot of regulation into in terms of the price that the renter pays.
I'm going to jump in here and just say a couple more things. And the vice chair of housing, this was one of the biggest, frankly, the biggest disappointment for me this session, that we couldn't get this across the finish line. And I will say, we made great progress this year. We were very close to getting this across the finish line. And I saw a comment of like, why do you think that they didn't negotiate in good faith? Because they could say rent control and scare everybody, which was literally, as Rep. Reed said, literally not the policy that we were putting before the legislature. It wasn't an absolute cap on rent. It was a per year increase. Every single year you could increase whatever we had 5%, 7%, and 15% as options. I will also note, we exempted new construction for the first 10 years. So as you think about concerns about the impact on supply, I don't buy it. Like we exempted new construction for 10 years. And the last thing I'll say, and I've known this for years, but this was the year where I supported a colleague putting the bill out there, and I'm going to bring it back next year. Landlords in the state of Washington, commercial landlords, residential landlords, do not pay taxes like every other business in the state of Washington. You all know I love me a conversation about tax fairness and equity. I think it is heinous that an entire industry is exempted from paying the business and occupation tax. I'm not going to have it anymore. Moving forward, I will put forward legislation that says if you are a landlord in this state, residential or commercial, you're going to pay the B&O tax like everybody else. And we have a small business exemption for the first $125,000 of gross revenue that applies to every business in the state. Our true mom and pop landlords, they're not going to pay the B&O tax. But all of these downtown commercial landlords, all of the big multinational corporate landlords that are gouging our tenants on rent and doing it all while they're not paying B&O taxes, no longer. I will bring that legislation back next year. And as I've talked to people, particularly small businesses in our districts who are subject to displacement, as much as our residents are, look at all of our small business district corridors in our neighborhoods. How many of our small businesses are displaced all the time? They're experiencing the same challenges our tenants are. Their rent's going up and years of investing in their small business is thwarted. They need protections too. And part of that will be holding our landlords to account. And again, we have existing law that will protect our mom and pops, but I'm pretty over it with how this fight went down this year, all while somebody's not paying taxes. So here we go.
Housing committee about to be spicy.
It was spicy this year, and yes,
it's gonna get spicier. We
need to build 1.1 million units over the next 20 years, and we know half of those units need to be subsidized to be affordable for Washington families. We are at crisis, and I'll just say all the studies that have been done on rent control, which again, this was not rent control, but all the studies that have been done in rent control were never in the context of massive reforms on zoning and supply. Nothing about our current situation matches any former study, and anything to the contrary is not operating in good faith. So I look forward to continuing with my seatmates to champion this very important issue for our district to stabilize.
Thank you so much. All right, we have another question for Representative Berry, and this is another bill that might be coming back next session. It's We Love the RAP Act. How did it change from last session, and how can we support it to see it passed next session?
We love it too.
I love the RAP Act. It was my labor of love this session. For those of you that don't know, it is a bill, I should say, to increase recycling, free and easy recycling to all Washington residents paid for by the producers of products. It's called Extended Producer Responsibility legislation. It's policy already very commonly seen in parts of Asia and Canada and Europe. And now all of the West Coast, except Washington, has this program. That's why it was supported by over 25 environmental organizations in our state. It will create thousands of union jobs, which is why it was supported by the labor community in our state. And it will ease the burden of recycling on cities and counties. And that's why it was so strongly supported by over 100 local elected leaders and cities and counties across Washington. The bill this year was a little different in a way. Last year I had a bill that also included a bottle deposit system, a bottle return system. We separated those two policies, really hearing loud and clear from lawmakers they would like to consider those separately. So my bill just included the extended producer responsibility legislation. But the reason that we were so close to getting it through the House this year, we really ran out of time. We did have the votes. We are really facing some very powerful special interests in opposition. The solid waste management companies who make their money for more materials that go to the landfills really think that the status quo is working well for them. And the status quo isn't working well for any of us because 50% of the materials that you put in your recycle bin that are recyclable materials are ending up in our landfills. And I don't need to tell you that our landfills are literally filling up and what that does to contribute to greenhouse gas emissions in our world. This is an easy fix to not only reduce the amount of packaging that we are receiving in our households when we buy things at the grocery store, but also paying for the service of having that recyclable material picked up at our curbside. Everybody who has trash pickup in the state of Washington will also have recycling pickup. And that's huge for rural areas and multi-family housing units. So anyway, I can go on and on. I love this bill. It's become a total passion of mine. It's super wonky, but really exciting. I absolutely will be bringing it back next year. And I want you to know, I loved getting all of your notes. I think we had the strongest support in the 36th district. So many of you wrote to us and said, keep it up. What can I do? That still remains. Contact your friends and family who live in other parts of the state. Ask them to contact their legislators and urge their support. Write letters to the editor in your local papers, urging lawmakers to support the bill, and educate the public about what this legislation will do and the huge challenges we face in getting it passed in our state. So thank you for the question. It will be back, and I look forward to getting it done.
Thank you so much. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left with a few more questions to go. So this next one is for all three members, and it's how did you all vote on the three initiatives that the legislature acted on? And can you speak on why you voted the way you did?
Yeah, I can go first. So I voted no on all three of the initiatives. And I will tell you guys, these initiatives are just, they're poorly written. They're politically cynical. They do nothing. All they do is take up time and money and attention and energy from the real work. And it is because some folks, certain parties are not in the majority and can't, and so they are using this as a kind of cynical ploy to get around working within the system and being negotiators and coming up with ideas that the people of Washington state actually want to respond to. So boy, it was really annoying to have to spend so much time on these this session. One that I voted no on was the initiative to roll back a lot of the progress that we've made on providing common sense regulations on lethal police pursuits. So these are high speed chases where the police are moving at speed. They're often chasing another car perpetrator or a suspected perpetrator at speed. They're driving through residential spaces and they are deadly. They are deadly for police officers who are much more likely to be killed or injured. They are deadly for community members who get killed. I think we all know the story of Janavi Kandula, who was killed by a police officer who was driving 70 miles per hour plus in a zone, in a 25 or 30 mile zone. They are not necessary for pursuing folks in our communities. And a lot of our police departments don't do high-speed chases as a matter of course anymore because they are so dangerous for officers in the community. They use trackers, they use aerial chases, they use drones. There's a lot of technology now. If they need to follow someone, maybe too much, maybe too much technology now, that if they need to follow someone, they know how to do it without driving at speed. Our streets are not a video game and our lives are not to be played with. And that's true for the lives of officers. That's true of the lives of community members. And I think we made very reasonable strides in providing some small safeguards for folks to protect them from lethal pursuits. There was already a rollback that I spoke very strongly against last session of some of those safeguards, and I wasn't willing to vote to see those undermined any further. I don't think that the pursuits initiative we passed really changes much about current law. Again, most of these initiatives are really about posturing and about politics and headlines and not about policy. But that's why I voted that way.
So I voted against all three as well. One thing I want to build on that Julia said is, look, conservative right-wing agitators in our state have tried for years to win majorities in the House and Senate, and they've failed at every turn. They're failing at the statewide offices as well, all the executive office up and down the ballot. They're not winning these elections. So their new tactic is now to roll back progressive policies we vote for in the legislature. You elect us and send us to support these policies. And now their tactic is to file initiatives that roll back this very progressive, important work that you have elected us to do. And I take great offense to that tactic. I think it was a really important message to send by voting no, that is unacceptable and we're not going to fall for these tactics. I'm disappointed that, we still have to defend 3 more on the ballot this fall, and we will. But I think that we need to show in strength that this is not going to work, because I think if they are successful with this, which you can argue that they were by passing these at the initiative, it's just going to keep coming. And we have to show a strong signal that that's unacceptable. It's not going to work with us. And it's not a tactic that can move forward to roll back policies that we pass that you elect us to do. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And I think Noelle has something to say too.
Yeah, so I'll jump in, and I voted no on 2 out of 3, but let me just say on the one where I did vote yes, there's no philosophical difference between myself and Reps Reed and Barry. There was just sort of a different tactical analysis. But I want to start and just +1 on the cynical nature of these initiatives. This was one guy that dropped $6 million of his own money in to pay for signatures to bring these initiatives to the legislature. We have a long history in Washington state of rich people not liking to pay taxes. They've been getting their way for a long time. The capital gains tax passing that in 2021 was a massive step in the right direction to making our tax code more progressive. And this is like an example of like a guy that doesn't want to pay. And this is his roundabout way of doing it. I said what I said. So I was no on pursuits. I was yes on the parental rights one. And again, I totally agree with what Rep. Barry said. Like, it didn't do anything really. It was largely a reiteration of current law with different words, but basically the same effect. And one of the things that we were all really trying to think about and manage is making sure that our kids understand that they are safe, and particularly our LGBTQ kids who are under attack every day. I think we've all heard the story about Next Benedict out of Minnesota, a non-binary kid who was beaten by their classmates and went home and took their own life. I mean, this is a child. We really wanted to make sure that we were managing this change to our statute in a way that we could monitor its implementation, making sure it wasn't having a negative effect on our kids. And by Adopt Oklahoma, thank you, not Minnesota, I appreciate that correction. And by implementing it, we're allowed to make changes almost immediately if we want to, but we can also really coordinate implementation with the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. And so I voted yes tactically to make sure that we could really control that message and implementation and all of that. But again, philosophically, no difference with my seatmates. On the income tax one, y'all, this is like the most cynical one of them of all. This bill literally did nothing. It just said, we don't want an income tax. Okay. You needed to pass a bill to say we don't want to pass a bill. Great. Wasn't like a constitutional amendment or something. It did nothing. We had hearings where we confirmed with nonpartisan staff that as broad as this language was, that it was prospective only, did not repeal any of our current taxes. And it was a very cynical ploy. This has long been the red herring argument of all of our great work on taxing, moving towards a progressive tax system. Frankly, nobody's even talking about this. The only people talking about income tax in Washington State are Republicans. As you may have all noticed, I am working on taxing wealth, not wages, because working people are paying more than their fair share already. It's the wealthiest among us who need to pay what they owe. So that's the direction that we've been going. So to just drop this, like, we don't want an income tax initiative, we just passed it because it didn't do anything, and we didn't want to play into the cynical approach to this, as my seatmates have articulated. So we all voted no. I speak for myself here, but like, our district has so loudly supported, particularly a progressive income tax, for so long as part of that story of making our tax code more progressive, that we wanted to send a strong message that we weren't buying it. But again, it did nothing. So it was fine that it passed. Thanks for the question.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we are almost to the end of our evening here. So we had one more question for Senator Frame before we go to our closing remarks. So I'll go ahead and ask that question. And then after that, I will turn it over to Rep. Reed for closing remarks. And then we'll hear from Representative Berry and Senator Frame. So Senator Frame, your question. You have a bill making clergy mandatory reporters of child abuse. Can you speak on why it didn't pass and how we can support it next session?
Man, I didn't know that this one was coming. I didn't prepare myself emotionally for this one. You know, I've worked, thanks. It's really important legislation to make clergy and other religious leaders mandated reporters of child abuse and neglect, like teachers, doctors, therapists, others. This is a really challenging topic in the legislature that frankly doesn't fall on partisan lines. And we took a big swing last year to say we're going to do this mandatory rural reporting with no exemptions at all. I could not pass that bill. I worked in the interim to find a compromise, particularly with the Catholic Conference that was very vocal, and crafted a extraordinarily delicate threading of the needle to try to both protect children and respect their position on religious freedom. I did that. When it got to the House, my colleagues in the House who worked so hard, again, across the aisle, my two seatmates were deep supporters of this, to have that bill with no exemption. The compromise was not acceptable to them. And it's another example of 60 days, short session. We just couldn't get it. They just couldn't get around having any exemption at all. And I don't blame them. It's a really hard topic. I don't know what the right path is. I think, frankly, some changes in the Senate may make a difference. We have a lot of people leaving the Senate, and that the makeup of the Senate may be what matters. But thanks for the question. Really challenging topic, and I just appreciate all the folks that have been tracking it and helping to support it. Thank you, everybody, from me for being here tonight, and I'll pass it over to my colleagues. I think Rep. Reed, you're going to go next.
Yeah, I'll just say, just a shout out to Senator Frame, who worked really hard on that bill. And just one of the things I love about serving as Senator Frame is that she takes on like the tough issues, the things that are hard to talk about, the things that are painful, and doesn't give up on them. And there aren't that many people in the legislature that want to do that. Most people want to talk about the stuff that's easy to put on a postcard or a billboard. And that's not always the stuff that moves us forward. And I also want to say, as a person who I am a Catholic, I am a person of faith, I'm really frustrated that the Catholic Conference is trying to make this and speak for all Catholics. I have people in my own parish coming up to me and saying that they support this bill and they want to see these changes implemented, and they want clergy members to be mandatory reporters. And I'm a big supporter of this bill. So it is not true that, all people of faith or all Catholics are opposing this bill or aren't supporting this bill either. And I think Senator Frame's been so great about, seeking out and finding allies and support. So just huge shout out to you on that. I guess final things, I would just say thank you all so much for letting me continue to serve you and to serve in this district, and for all the outreach you've done. If you haven't gotten a response to your constituent correspondence, I promise you it's coming. We had 60 insane days, so we're still working on clearing out the inbox. But I do read and we do eventually respond to all of your messages. So please continue to write me. Please continue to share with me what you think. I used to be on Twitter, but I'm now on Threads. So if you are interested in following, of course, you can follow my official Facebook page or the House Democratic Caucus Instagram. But I am also on Threads. And so if you're on Threads, you can follow me at State Rep Julia Reed. And just thank you so much for all of your support. And thank you, ladies, for letting me continue to be part of your delegation.
Oh, we are so honored to serve you. I would say that the interim is a really wonderful time to invite us to come to your neighborhood, talk with your neighbors and friends and family, come to your workplace, come to the place where you volunteer, come to the place where your kids go to school, because we have the time. So consider inviting us. One of us can come, all three of us can come, two of us can come, and send those emails and calls because we want to know what's on your mind. So thank you so much for the absolute honor of serving you in Olympia, and keep in touch.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to participate tonight. And we will see you at the next one.